Cynthia had never been more terrified in her life. Standing at the edge of the Seoul skyline, the wind tugging at her Kenyan dress, she felt the cold thrill of fear, and something darker stirring beneath it. Her husband, Hyun Jae-min, the man whose name made even the city's most dangerous whisper in fear, was watching her with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. Every angle of his sharp, predatory gaze seemed to see straight through her, unraveling every carefully constructed thought, every instinct she relied on. "I'll be gentle," he said, voice low, velvet over steel, and Cynthia froze, not from the words, but from the weight behind them. She knew he lied. She knew every promise could be a threat, every touch a claim. And yet, she couldn't look away. The air between them seemed to hum, charged with secrets neither of them had spoken, and with danger she couldn't name. Tonight was supposed to be their honeymoon. Instead, it felt like a trap, a test, a collision of desire and fear that would change everything. And as Cynthia's heart hammered in her chest, she realized she wasn't just a bride, she was a player in a deadly game she hadn't even begun to understand. Cynthia stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the penthouse, the neon lights of Seoul stretching endlessly beneath her like a glittering maze. The Kenyan breeze that had once comforted her at home now felt foreign, sharp against her skin, as if the city itself were testing her resolve. She should have been smiling, should have been celebrating a new beginning. Instead, her fingers clenched at the silk of her gown, trembling against the thought of the man who had bought her hand in marriage, not with love, but with the weight of debts she had never known her father owed. Hyun Jae-min stepped out of the shadows, his silhouette imposing, the sharp lines of his Tom Ford suit only amplifying the danger that clung to him like a second skin. His eyes found hers, dark, calculating, and entirely unreadable. Every instinct in Cynthia screamed to run, to hide, but curiosity rooted her in place. He was the head of one of Seoul's most feared syndicates, a man whose name alone could make people disappear. Yet here he was, only a few feet away, whispering words that should have calmed her, but didn't. "I'll be gentle," he murmured, his voice low and almost intimate. Cynthia froze, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. She couldn't tell if the fear twisting her stomach was from him, or because part of her wanted to see if he meant it. His hands hovered near hers, and for a moment, the room felt impossibly small, the air too thick to breathe. Every story she had ever heard about men like him, the violence, the ruthlessness, the obsession, flashed before her eyes. Yet there was something else in his gaze, something almost human. Cynthia's mind raced. 12 hours ago, she had stepped off a private jet, handed her passport to strangers, and signed a marriage contract she didn't fully understand. Her father's solution to his debts had turned her life upside down, but now she was here, in a city that didn't sleep, in a marriage she didn't choose, with a man she couldn't predict. Every detail of her surroundings, the polished floors, the art that seemed almost too expensive, the faint scent of cologne lingering in the air, reminded her that she was in someone else's world now. Someone dangerous. Someone all-consuming. Then Hyun Jae-min moved closer, his shadow falling over her like a warning. The city lights reflected in his eyes, making them glint with something that could be promised, or peril. "Cynthia," he said, his hand brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, "I hope you understand, nothing in this world will protect you except me." Her heart thumped violently, caught between fear and fascination, as a sudden knock echoed through the apartment. Cynthia turned, and the sound felt wrong, too deliberate, too loud, like someone had followed her. Hyun Jae-min stiffened, his expression unreadable, and in that instant, she realized, tonight wasn't just the beginning of their marriage. It was the beginning of something far darker. Someone was in the penthouse. Cynthia's first night in Seoul was nothing like she had imagined. The city glittered below the penthouse windows, lights flickering like distant stars, but inside, the air felt heavy, charged with something she couldn't name. Hyun Jae-min moved around the room with effortless control, his presence as commanding as it had been the first moment they met. He poured 2 glasses of wine, the liquid catching the light like molten amber. "To us," he said, his voice low, almost hypnotic. Cynthia lifted her glass, her fingers brushing his. She wanted to feel warmth, to believe this was the start of something magical, but a shiver ran down her spine. She noticed the men in the shadows, their eyes sharp, scanning, unblinking. They were not hotel staff. These were shadows that moved in the world Hyun ruled. A world she didn't understand, a world she had no choice but to enter. Her heart raced as she realized she was not just his bride, she was a part of a kingdom built on fear, wealth, and violence. The thought tightened her chest, but she forced a smile. Hyun set the glasses down and leaned close. "You don't have to be afraid," he murmured. His hand lingered on hers, warm but firm. Cynthia nodded, unsure whether she believed him. He was polite, charming even, but polite in the way a tiger might be charming before it strikes. She felt the seductive pull of him, the promise of safety, and the threat of danger in one intoxicating mix. Their dinner began quietly, the soft clink of silverware masking the tension that hummed between them. Cynthia tried to focus on the flavors, the elegance, the fact that she was technically on her honeymoon. But then the door chimed, and a silent servant appeared, holding a single envelope, thick and unmarked. Hyun raised an eyebrow, signaling her to take it. With trembling hands, Cynthia opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of papers, folded carefully. Her breath caught as she read the first line, her father's name. Her father, whose debt had led her here, whose secrets had shaped her life without her knowing. The words that followed were a revelation: he had hidden more than just money. Names, deals, betrayals, all inked onto the paper in a handwriting she recognized but now barely trusted. Hyun leaned over her shoulder, eyes dark and unreadable. "Everything is connected," he said softly. But Cynthia couldn't hear him. Her mind raced, imagining the consequences, the people who might come for her, for him, for the life she had only just stepped into. And then a thought cut through her like ice: if her father had lied, who could she trust? Outside, the night of Seoul pulsed with lights and life, but inside the penthouse, Cynthia felt the first real weight of fear settle into her bones. The honeymoon had begun, but so had the danger. Cynthia sat on the edge of the bed, the papers still clutched in her hands, her mind spinning. Each line she read twisted her stomach tighter. Her father's debts were not just financial, they were promises made to men who didn't forgive easily, men who measured failure in fear. Names she had only overheard whispered in the past now stared at her in black ink, cold and undeniable. She swallowed, her throat dry. Hyun watched her quietly, leaning against the doorframe with that same unreadable expression that made her skin prickle. "You need to understand," he said, voice calm but heavy. "Your father's mistakes, they're not just his. They affect you now." Cynthia looked up, her eyes searching his. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all she could manage was a small, shaky nod. "Then, what do I do?" she whispered. Hyun stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, both protective and threatening. "You stay close. You trust me. And you learn quickly how this world works, or you get hurt." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of steel. Cynthia felt both fear and relief. He was the only one who could shield her, but at what cost? Could she accept a life wrapped in shadows, danger, and secrecy? They spoke little after that. Cynthia tried to absorb every detail, every nuance of the papers. Each name, each transaction, each hidden deal was a thread that wove her into a web she didn't know she had entered. And as the hours passed, a part of her began to understand: escape wasn't an option. Survival meant learning the rules of Hyun's world, and trusting the man who ruled it. The city outside continued its restless hum, but inside the penthouse, silence had a weight of its own. Cynthia stared out at the lights, imagining the enemies who might be watching, waiting. A cold knot formed in her stomach, tightening with every thought of who could come for her. Then the phone rang. Hyun picked it up without a word, his jaw tightening as he listened. Cynthia watched his face, her heart hammering. The words he spoke were clipped, urgent, but the tension in his stance spoke volumes. He hung up, eyes dark as storm clouds. "They know where we are," he said quietly, almost to himself. Cynthia felt her blood run cold. "Who?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Hyun didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the window, scanning the streets below as if they held the answers. Outside, the city continued to sparkle, unaware of the danger lurking in its shadows. Inside, Cynthia realized just how fragile her safety was, and how little control she had over the life she had been pulled into. Someone was watching them. And this time, there would be no warnings. Cynthia woke to the sharp sound of a knock that wasn't polite, it was deliberate, demanding, almost like a warning. She froze, her heart thudding in her chest, the papers from her father's debt still scattered across the floor. Hyun's presence was a shadow behind her, silent and immovable. The door opened just a crack, and a man stepped inside. His eyes were cold, calculating, and he carried the kind of confidence that made threats feel like promises. "Cynthia Okafor," he said slowly, though she flinched at the name. "Your father crossed the wrong people. I'm here to make sure you understand the consequences." Fear clawed at her throat. She wanted to scream, but Hyun moved like a predator, closing the space between them. In a blink, he had the man pinned against the wall, his hand a steel trap around the intruder's neck. "You will leave," Hyun said, low and lethal. "Now." The man smirked, even as Hyun's grip tightened. "This isn't about me," he hissed. "It's about her. She has to pay." Cynthia felt the tension slice through the room like ice. She wanted to pull away, but the shock rooted her in place. The man's words were a reminder, she was not just a bride in a luxurious penthouse. She was bait, a symbol, a target. And Hyun, her husband, was both her protector and a force she could barely comprehend. In a sudden move, the intruder twisted free, slipping past Hyun with a speed that made Cynthia's stomach drop. He left a small envelope on the floor, then vanished into the shadows before she could even think to react. Hyun's eyes followed him, sharp and calculating, as if he could still see the man moving through the city streets. Cynthia picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside, a single card had been left, words written in jagged, threatening letters, "She will pay for his sins." Her name wasn't just written, it was underlined, marked. Hyun's gaze fell on her, and for the first time, she noticed a storm behind his calm exterior. It wasn't just anger, it was something darker, something that blurred the lines between love and ownership. He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers as if to steady her, but his grip lingered a moment too long. "You are mine to protect," he said softly, yet the words carried an edge that made her shiver. Cynthia swallowed, the mixture of relief and fear twisting inside her. She wanted to trust him completely, wanted to believe that his ruthless world could shield her. But the line between love and control had never felt so thin, and she couldn't help but wonder how long she could stay on the edge without falling. The envelope trembled in her hands. Someone wanted her scared. And now, they were playing a game only she had been forced to enter. The city lights spilled through the tall windows, painting the penthouse in shards of gold and shadow. Cynthia sat quietly on the edge of the bed, the card from the attacker still clutched in her hand. Every muscle in her body was tense, yet she couldn't stop stealing glances at Hyun. He was standing by the window, his back to her, but the tension in his shoulders drew her eyes like a magnet. He turned slowly, and when their eyes met, something flickered, an emotion she hadn't seen before. It wasn't the calculated control of the Mafia boss, but a glimpse of something human, almost fragile. "You're scared," he said softly, crossing the room. "I know what they've done to you, and I won't let them touch you." Cynthia's chest tightened, a strange warmth spreading through her. She wanted to hate him for the fear he inspired, for the power he held over her life, but instead, she felt drawn to him, pulled toward a side of him she wasn't supposed to see. His hand brushed her hair, and she shivered, caught between terror and an inexplicable yearning. I don't know what to do, she whispered, her voice trembling. Everything is happening so fast. Hyun's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through the icy exterior. I don't always show it, he murmured. But I care for you, more than anyone or anything I've ever cared for. Cynthia's heart thudded painfully. There was a dangerous honesty in him that made her stomach twist, and she realized the line between fear and desire had begun to blur. His presence was suffocating yet irresistible, and for the first time, she wondered if trust could survive in a world like his. As if sensing her thoughts, Hyun moved toward a side wall, pressing a hidden panel. The wall shifted, revealing a small, dimly lit room she had never noticed. Cynthia's curiosity battled her caution, but she stepped inside. On a sleek, black table lay a sealed envelope addressed to Hyun. Her father's handwriting. Her stomach sank. She hesitated, then opened it, eyes scanning the page. Hyun, protect her, but know the truth. There are things about Cynthia you do not yet understand. If you hurt her, I fear the consequences will be worse than any enemy I've made. Her hand trembled, and she looked up at Hyun. The rare softness in his eyes had hardened again, replaced by a shadow of unease. He didn't speak, only held the letter carefully, as if it weighed more than its paper. Cynthia realized with a cold certainty, the world she had been pulled into was darker than she imagined, and now even her father's secrets were reaching into Hyun's hands. The penthouse felt smaller suddenly, every corner hiding a truth she wasn't ready for. And in that hidden room, with the letter between them, Cynthia understood one terrifying thing: trust here was a dangerous game. Cynthia paced the penthouse, the envelope from her father still burning in her thoughts. She had trusted Hyun, leaned on him in a world that seemed impossible to navigate, but now, a shadow of doubt crept into her heart. She remembered his words, his rare softness, and she wanted to believe him. Yet, something about the letter made her stomach twist. I need answers, she whispered to herself, moving toward the study. Papers, ledgers, and hidden files littered the desk, a side of Hyun's life she had never dared explore. She hesitated, then flipped open a locked drawer. Inside were documents tied to her father's debts, loan agreements, coded messages, and transfers she didn't recognize. Her heart raced as she read the numbers, the names of shadowy figures she didn't know, and a figure loomed large: Hyun had never told her the truth. Her father's debts weren't fully cleared. Part of the danger, the threats, the secrets, they still existed. Her trust shattered in an instant, leaving only fear and betrayal. She turned to leave, only to hear a faint click behind her. Her blood froze. Before she could react, a heavy force slammed into her back, and she went down, the documents scattering across the floor. A mask-covered figure loomed over her, hands tight around her arms. Cynthia Okafor, a voice hissed, distorted and cold. You thought you were safe. She struggled, claws scrabbling against the stranger's grip, but they were too strong. Panic surged, choking her. She tried to scream, but the figure pressed a hand over her mouth, dragging her toward the service elevator. In the chaos, Hyun appeared in the doorway, but a loud crash of shattered glass from the balcony pulled him momentarily away. Time stretched, each second a dagger in Cynthia's chest. She saw his hand reach for her, eyes wide with fury, but he was delayed, caught off guard by the intruder's sudden, precise attack. The masked figure's grip tightened, dragging her into the shadowy elevator shaft. Her mind spun, everything she thought she knew, every promise, every touch from Hyun, it all felt like a lie now. She realized the man she feared and desired might not be able to save her this time. The elevator descended with a metallic groan, shaking under the weight of danger. Cynthia's pulse pounded so loudly she was sure the masked figure could hear it. She tried to focus, tried to think, but fear clouded her mind. And somewhere above, in the penthouse, Hyun's rage built, a storm he could barely control, while below, Cynthia vanished into the unknown, trapped between betrayal, fear, and the dangerous pull of the man she both hated and needed. The night had become a predator, and Cynthia was its prey. The room was dark, the only light coming from a single flickering bulb that swung from the ceiling, casting long shadows on the concrete walls. Cynthia's hands were bound, her wrists raw and aching, but her mind raced faster than her heart. She had to think, panic would kill her faster than the masked men waiting outside. "Don't even try screaming," a rough voice hissed from the doorway. Two men in suits, their faces hidden under scarves, paced slowly, like predators savoring their prey. Cynthia pressed herself into the corner, forcing herself to stay calm. She had faced fear before, but this was a test she couldn't run from. She studied the room quickly. A loose pipe along the wall, a weak lock on the door, a small window near the ceiling, each detail became a possible lifeline. Her father's secrets, Hyun's hidden warnings, the cruel lessons of the past weeks, they had sharpened her mind in ways she hadn't realized. Her captors argued in low tones outside, their attention divided. Cynthia inched toward the pipe, feeling it under her fingers, testing its strength. She had learned one thing in her short, twisted honeymoon: survival required more than luck, it required cunning. She bent the pipe, using it to pick at the lock. Her pulse thudded in her ears, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. Suddenly, the door rattled. Footsteps pounded the floor outside. Hyun. Relief surged through her, but it was short-lived. A barrage of gunfire shattered the quiet. Bullets ripped through the walls, sending sparks and dust into the air. She froze, realizing the attack wasn't coordinated. Hyun hadn't expected them. "Cynthia." Hyun's voice roared through the chaos, but it was distant, lost under the shouts and gunfire. She tried to call back, but the men shoved her roughly toward the back of the room. The hallway beyond was a trap. Her instincts kicked in. With a sudden twist of her body, she slammed the captor into the wall, ducked under his arm, and sprinted toward the weak window. Glass cut her palms, but she ignored the pain, clambering through the small opening into the cold night air. She landed hard, scraping her knees, but she was free. Hyun's figure appeared at the rooftop above, gun raised, fury in his eyes. But he couldn't reach her, not yet. The rival men regrouped, their voices shouting threats she didn't fully understand. Cynthia glanced at the city below, darkness stretching like a river before her. Fear still clawed at her chest, but a spark of something else flickered: courage. She was no longer just a bride trapped in a mafia world, she was a survivor. And tonight, survival meant running alone. Behind her, Hyun's shadow loomed, powerful and desperate, but ahead, the unknown waited. Cynthia didn't hesitate. She leapt into the night, every nerve screaming, every heartbeat a drum of defiance. The chase had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. Cynthia stumbled into the dim light of the safe house, her body aching, her mind still racing from the rooftop escape. Hyun was there, standing silently in the corner, his coat dusted with debris, his eyes dark and unreadable. For a heartbeat, the world felt frozen. Fear, anger, and something else, something dangerous, hung between them. "You left me," she said finally, her voice shaking. "You were supposed to protect me." Hyun's jaw tightened. "I did everything I could. But you surprised everyone. You're stronger than I thought." His voice softened, almost a whisper. "You shouldn't have gone alone." Cynthia's gaze sharpened. "And you? How many lies have you told me, Hyun? About my father, about your world, about us?" Her hands trembled, the heat of frustration and hurt burning in her chest. "Do you even care about me, or am I just another pawn in your empire?" Hyun stepped closer, his hand hovering near hers, but not touching. "Cynthia. I care," he said quietly. "More than I've cared for anyone." You think this life allows tenderness, but I want you to know that, whatever this is, it's real. Her heart thudded painfully. For a moment, the walls of mistrust cracked. The danger of his world, the lies, the power, all of it seemed to fade under the weight of his words. She felt it too, that magnetic pull, the forbidden connection that terrified her even as it drew her in. They stood there, suspended in a fragile silence, and for the first time since their marriage, Cynthia saw him, not the Mafia boss, not the glacier of soul, but Hyun, a man capable of vulnerability. But the moment shattered with a sudden sharp noise from the doorway. Hyun's eyes snapped toward it, cold and calculating. A man stepped out of the shadows, Jun-ho, Hyun's most trusted lieutenant, the man who had always been by his side. But tonight, the glint in Jun-ho's eyes was not loyalty, it was betrayal. You shouldn't have gotten involved, boss, Jun-ho said, voice low and controlled. Everything you've built, it could be ruined because of her. His hand twitched toward a concealed weapon. Hyun's lips pressed into a thin line, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Cynthia's stomach dropped, a sense of danger slicing through the fragile warmth that had just formed between them. Jun-ho smiled faintly, cruelly. You've been too soft, Hyun. Too distracted. And now, she's in the middle of it all. Cynthia's hand gripped Hyun's arm instinctively, but he shook his head slightly, a warning. They weren't safe, not even here. The betrayal wasn't just an attack, it was a storm coming from inside his own walls. Hyun's eyes met hers, the storm inside him barely contained. Stay behind me, he said, voice low, deadly. This ends tonight, one way or another. And in that instant, Cynthia realized that their honeymoon had shifted from fragile romance to a war of trust, danger, and impossible choices. The safe house felt smaller than usual, its walls closing in around them. Rain pounded against the roof like a warning drum, and the wind howled through the cracks in the windows. Hyun moved silently, checking locks, scanning the shadows, while Cynthia pressed herself against the far wall, trying to make sense of everything. They've sabotaged the deal, Hyun said finally, his voice low, tight with barely contained anger. Jun-ho made sure no one would show up. Everything we worked for, it's ruined. Cynthia swallowed, her chest tight. She had never seen Hyun like this, furious, yet controlled, like a storm barely restrained. And she realized, with a mixture of fear and fascination, that she was drawn into the center of it all. Then, we're trapped here, she whispered. What now? Hyun's gaze softened slightly as he turned to her. Now, we survive. Together. For the first time, the line between boss and bride blurred. Cynthia felt the weight of her fear and trust settling on her shoulders. She was terrified, yes, but the terror was strangely comforting when he was near. She could feel his strength, his precision, and, more frighteningly, the depth of his care. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated by the occasional distant sound outside. Cynthia's mind, racing, tried to find patterns, to decode the chaos surrounding them. That's when she noticed it, a folded piece of paper tucked under the leg of the table. It had been hidden in plain sight, marked with a symbol she recognized from her father's old papers. Cynthia's hands shook as she unfolded it. The handwriting was her father's. But the message wasn't a plea or explanation, it was a warning. A warning that spoke of alliances, debts, and betrayals reaching beyond Hyun's world. Both families were entangled, more than she had ever imagined. Hyun, she said, her voice trembling. He leaned over her shoulder, eyes narrowing as he read. The tension in his body shifted, and for the first time, Cynthia saw something like fear, or maybe concern, flicker across his features. This changes everything, he muttered. If what your father wrote is true, then we're not just fighting Jun-ho or the rival families. There's a bigger game at play. And it involves both of us. Cynthia's pulse quickened. The clue wasn't just a warning, it was a key, a door opening to secrets she didn't even know existed. Secrets that could explain why she had been thrust into this world so suddenly, and why Hyun's life was as dangerous as it was. Outside, the storm raged on, and the walls of the safe house seemed to pulse with unspoken threats. Hyun moved closer, his presence a shield, his hand brushing against hers. Cynthia realized they had no choice but to trust each other completely, because the next move could cost them everything. And deep in her chest, a new fear took root. If they survived this night, what other truths would the morning reveal? The city felt colder than usual, the rain streaking the streets like tears no one would wipe away. Cynthia's hands were slick with blood and sweat, her heart hammering with a rhythm that matched the sirens in the distance. Hyun was gone. Taken. And she was the only one who could save him. The memory of him, restrained and defiant, haunted her. She remembered his eyes, not angry, not pleading, but steady. Trusting. For a fleeting moment, she had seen the vulnerability he never let anyone else touch. And now he was in danger, and the choice to save him was hers alone. She clenched her fists and forced herself to move. Every step through the dark alleys, every shadow that flickered across the walls, tested her resolve. This was no longer the frightened bride hiding in the penthouse, this was Cynthia, a woman shaped by fear, betrayal, and survival. Every secret, every danger, every cruel lesson had brought her here. She would not fail. Finally, she reached the abandoned warehouse where Hyun was being held. The air reeked of oil and damp concrete, and the faint sound of chains rattling echoed through the cavernous space. Cynthia's pulse quickened. She could hear him calling her name, quiet but urgent, a thread tying her to him across the room. Her hand went to the door, ready to kick it down, but movement in the shadows stopped her. A figure stepped forward. Familiar. Her father. The man she had loved, feared, and resented in equal measure. His eyes were wide, wild, and desperate. "Cynthia, you shouldn't be here," he said, voice low, almost pleading. It's too dangerous." Her chest tightened. "Father. Hyun, he's my husband. He's in there, and you know it. Why are you here? Why are you hiding things from me?" He shook his head, stepping closer. I had no choice. Everything I did, every secret, every debt, every lie, it was to keep you safe. But now, it's out of control. You can't understand yet. If you go in there. Father. Cynthia snapped, her fear now fueled by fury. He's counting on me. I won't stand by while he's in their hands. Her father's face contorted in conflict. He opened his mouth as if to say more, but Cynthia knew that hesitation could cost Hyun his life. She took a deep breath, her resolve solidifying. She had been tested before, but this was the ultimate trial. Her choices now would define everything, her future, Hyun's life, and the fragile trust between them. And yet, as she stepped forward, her father's hand shot out, stopping her in her tracks. His eyes were filled with desperation, guilt, and a secret she could not yet grasp. "You have to listen to me, Cynthia, not everything is what it seems," he whispered. The warehouse door creaked behind him, the chains rattling louder. Time was slipping, and every second counted. Cynthia's mind raced. She could fight him, ignore him, or retreat, but the decision she made now could either save Hyun, or doom them both. The night cracked open with gunfire. Cynthia ran beside Hyun through a maze of metal doors and narrow halls, her breath sharp in her chest. Sirens wailed far away, but inside the compound, only orders and threats echoed. Rival factions had closed in from both sides, moving fast, hunting them like prey. Hyun stopped behind a concrete pillar and pulled her close. "Stay with me," he said, steady and fierce. "No matter what happens." "I'm not leaving," Cynthia replied, surprising herself with how calm she sounded. Fear still lived in her, but it no longer ruled her. They moved together, careful and quick. Cynthia watched, learned, and reacted. When a guard rushed them, she slammed a door shut and locked it, buying them precious seconds. When another tried to circle behind, Hyun dropped him with one clean strike. Love and danger blurred until they felt like the same thing, trust in motion, built under fire. In a control room, they found files scattered across a desk. Cynthia's hands shook as she read names she knew, her father's contacts, old deals, hidden payments. These aren't just enemies, she said. They're family ties. Hyun's face hardened. I suspected as much, he said quietly. But seeing it, changes everything. The lights flickered. Footsteps approached. Hyun pushed Cynthia behind him, his body a shield. When I say run, you run, he whispered. No, she said. We finish this together. The door opened. A familiar voice filled the room, calm and confident. You always were stubborn, Hyun. Hyun froze. His eyes widened, not with fear, but disbelief. The man stepped into the light. It was Min-suk, Hyun's oldest ally, the one who trained him, the one he trusted above all others. You taught me loyalty, Min-suk said softly. But loyalty has a price. And tonight, it's yours. Cynthia felt the air drain from her lungs. You, she whispered. Min-suk smiled, thin and cold. Both families. One long plan. Your father knew. Hyun knew pieces. But not the end. Hyun's jaw tightened. Pain flashed across his face, quickly buried under resolve. You used us, he said. I prepared you, Min-suk replied. Now choose. The room seemed to shrink. Love, loyalty, and betrayal tangled into one sharp moment. Cynthia stepped forward, standing beside Hyun, her hand finding his. We choose each other, she said. Min-suk's smile faded. The lights went out. And in the darkness, the final battle began. The darkness broke with shouts and flashing lights. Cynthia moved by instinct now, not fear. She pulled Hyun toward a side corridor she remembered from the plans, her mind racing faster than her heart. Gunshots echoed behind them. Somewhere ahead, Min-suk's voice barked orders, calm and cruel. They burst into a wide hall filled with shadows and steel beams. Min-suk stood waiting, alone, as if he had known they would come. His eyes flicked to Cynthia, then back to Hyun. It didn't have to end like this, he said. You made it end, Hyun replied, stepping forward. Min-suk raised his weapon. Before Hyun could move, Cynthia grabbed a metal rod from the floor and slammed it against a control panel. Sparks flew. The lights flared bright, then dimmed. In the brief chaos, Min-suk fired. Hyun cried out and fell to one knee. No! Cynthia screamed. She ran to him, pressing her hands against his side. Blood soaked her fingers. Panic surged, but she forced it down. Think, she told herself. Survive. Min-suk laughed softly. You see. Love makes you weak. Cynthia stood, shaking but steady. You're wrong, she said. Love taught me how to fight. She moved fast, using the shadows, the noise, the confusion. When Min-suk turned, she was already there. She knocked the weapon from his hand and slammed him to the ground. He struggled, shocked, but she held firm, every ounce of fear turned into strength. Security rushed in moments later. It was over. Cynthia dropped beside Hyun, her breath coming in short gasps. His face was pale, eyes half closed. Stay with me, she begged. I'm here, he whispered, trying to smile. You were incredible. Sirens grew louder. Medics shouted orders. One of them looked at Cynthia, serious. "He needs surgery now," he said. "But there's a risk. He may not survive." Cynthia's chest tightened. Another choice followed her, heavy and sharp. A man from Hyun's world stepped forward. "If we move him publicly, enemies will finish what they started," he warned. "We can hide him, but it means disappearing." Cynthia looked at Hyun, at the man who terrified her, protected her, loved her. The life she knew was already gone. Slowly, she nodded. "Do it," she said. "Save him. No matter the cost." As they carried Hyun away into the night, Cynthia followed, knowing one truth clearly. This choice would change everything they were, and everything they could become. The room was quiet except for the soft beep of a monitor. Cynthia sat beside the bed, holding Hyun's hand, afraid to blink. Days had passed since the night everything broke apart. Days of waiting, praying, and fighting fear that crept in when the lights were low. Then his fingers moved. Cynthia gasped. "Hyun," she whispered. His eyes opened slowly, dark and steady, the same eyes that once scared her and now felt like home. "You stayed," he said, his voice weak but warm. "Always," she replied, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You don't get rid of me that easily." Recovery was not fast. Hyun had to relearn patience, something he had never needed before. Cynthia stayed through it all, bandages, pain, silence. She saw the man behind the power, the scars behind the strength. And Hyun saw something new too. Cynthia was no longer the frozen bride. She spoke with calm confidence, asked hard questions, and made choices that mattered. When they finally returned to their hidden home, the city felt different. Dangerous, yes, but also full of possibility. "I won't lock you away from this world," Hyun said one night as they stood by the window. "If you stay as my equal." Cynthia looked at him, searching for control, for fear. She found none. Only truth. "Then we face it together," she said. From that day on, things changed. Cynthia sat in meetings. She read reports. She noticed patterns others missed. When trouble came, she didn't panic, she planned. Some men doubted her at first. They stopped when her ideas saved them. Love grew quieter but deeper. Not fire alone, but trust. Not promises, but proof. Still, danger never slept. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the glass, a message appeared on Hyun's secure phone. No name. No number. Just one line. "The past is not buried. Nairobi remembers." Cynthia felt a chill. "That's from Kenya," she said slowly. "From before we met." Hyun closed the phone and looked at her, his expression serious but calm. "Then our story isn't over." Cynthia reached for his hand, her grip firm. "Good," she said. "I'm not afraid anymore." Outside, the city lights burned bright, unaware of the storm quietly forming again. And side by side, bride and boss stood ready, not as victims of fate, but as partners who would decide what came next. Because some love stories don't end. They evolve.